The glass left the Duchess of Hollandsby's hand before she knew she had let it go. It was the last evening of the harvest assembly, the long gallery full of candle smoke and violins, and she had been mid-sentence, her chin lifted, her diamonds catching the light as they always did. A man in a plain dark coat and stable boots had come up the servants' stair where no servant should have walked, crossed the polished floor in front of 200 guests, and bent to say 6 words at her ear. Only 6. Nobody else heard them. The room saw her face go the color of tallow, saw her ringed fingers open as though the stem had turned to ice, and heard the wineglass shatter on the parquet in a bright wet star at her feet. The violins did not stop at once. They faltered, recovered, then died one instrument at a time, as the silence spread out from that broken glass like a stain through linen. The Duchess did not look down at the wine soaking the hem of her gown. She looked at the man who had spoken, and for the first time in 30 years of being looked at, she was the one being seen. Sophie Carstone stood at the edge of all of it, with a tray of empty cordial glasses she had been too useful to set down, and she understood, before anyone else in that gallery, exactly what the Stablehand had said. To understand how a wine glass came to break in the most powerful hand in the county, you have to go back to the cold morning 7 months earlier, when Sophie first carried hot water up the back stairs of Hollandsby Court and learned what kind of house she had been sent to. She had come there in the 3rd week of March in a borrowed mantle that could not quite manage the wind off the fens, with one trunk and a letter of introduction written by a clergyman who had known her father. Her father had been a naval purser, an honest one, which in his profession had made him poor. When the fever took him, he had left Sophie 26 years old, unmarried, and dependent on the charity of a cousin she had never met, the Duchess of Hollandsby, who took her in as a companion and made it understood within the first hour that a companion was a thing that fetched, carried, read aloud, and was grateful. The house itself was magnificent and cold in the way only very old, very rich houses can be. 300 rooms, a long gravel drive lined with limes, a chapel with a heartwood crest in every window, and at the center of it the Duchess herself, widowed these 4 years and ruling the estate for her absent son with a thoroughness that frightened the servants and the magistrates equally. She was a handsome woman of 56, who wore her late husband's authority like a second set of jewels. She had decided a great many things about a great many people, and she was never wrong, because being wrong was not a thing her position permitted. About Sophie she had decided everything in an afternoon. "You will find," the Duchess said on that first day, not unkindly, the way one explains a rule to a child, that the charity girl who knows her place keeps it longest. She said it across the breakfast room to her companion of the moment, a Miss Pamela Cordwell whose people had money and cloth and ambitions in marriage, and who laughed behind her fan as though it were the cleverest thing she had heard all season. The charity girl. Sophie heard the words land, and did not flinch, only folded them away with the others, and poured the chocolate without spilling a drop. That was the first time the label was spoken aloud, and it would not be the last. Sophie's days settled into a shape. She rose before the maids, read the Duchess her letters, walked her pug in the wet, mended the lace the laundry tore, and learned the long geography of corridors where she was permitted, and the shorter one of rooms where she was not. She found, to her surprise, that she did not mind the work. What she minded was the way the great house seemed to hold its breath, as though it were keeping a secret it had grown tired of keeping, and the way the Duchess's eyes went hard and small whenever the conversation turned, as it sometimes did among the older servants, to the Duke's late brother, Lord Aldrich, who had quarreled with the family and died abroad and was not spoken of at table. The stables were the one place Sophie was sent that she came to look forward to. She was sent there because the Duchess kept a high-strung grey mare she would not ride and would not sell, and somebody had to carry word twice a week about the creature's feeding, and the somebody was Sophie. The head man of the stables was named Linus Hartwood, and the household regarded him as a curiosity, because he was educated past his station and kept to himself and read books in the tack room by lamplight when the work was done. He was perhaps 32, tall and broad through the shoulder, with dark hair he wore unfashionably plain, and a quiet way of moving among the horses that the horses trusted and the grooms envied. His hands were a working man's hands. His voice was not a working man's voice, and the first time he spoke to Sophie she heard the difference and could not place it. "The grey will not take the bran mash," he said on a grey morning in April, not looking up from the hoof he had cradled in his lap. "She wants the field and the company of the bay. She is lonely, your Grace's mare." It is a thing that happens to creatures kept apart for their value. Sophie understood he was not only speaking of the horse. She did not answer the part he had not said aloud. "I will tell her Grace, the field and the bay," she said. And he looked up then, and his eyes were the color of smoke over water, and something in her chest moved like a key turning that she had thought was rusted shut. She told herself it was nothing. A companion did not notice a Stablehand's eyes. She told herself this with great firmness on the walk back to the house, and she had almost succeeded by the time she reached the lime walk where Miss Cordwell was waiting, with a basket of cut flowers and a smile sharpened on a whetstone. "You spend a great deal of time at the stables," Pamela said sweetly. "I suppose it is where a girl like you feels most at her ease among the working folk. One does find one's level." Sophie said that she went where her Grace sent her, and walked on, and did not give Pamela the flush she was angling for. What Sophie did not yet know, what nobody in the house knew except the man with the smoke-colored eyes and one other, was that Linus Hartwood had not come to Hollinsby Court for the wages he had come for a page. Here the story must pause and let you understand the bones of the thing, because a whisper that breaks a duchess does not come from nowhere. Linus Hartwood was the only living son of Lord Aldrich, the late Duke's elder brother, the one whose name went unspoken at table, and Lord Aldrich had been the elder. By every law of England the title and the estate of Hollinsby should have passed to him and after him to his son, and the woman who ruled the house should have been at most a guest in it. Lord Aldrich had committed one unforgivable act. He had married, for love, abroad, a clergyman's daughter named Hartwood, in a small chapel in a small town, with the bishop's leave and the bishop's transcript filed where such things are filed. Then he had died of a wound taken in a fall from a horse, far from home, before he could bring his wife and infant son back to claim what was theirs. And his younger brother, comfortable in possession, had let it be put about that the marriage had never been valid, that the boy was no Hartwood at all, that the foreign chapel had no record. The wife had died poor. The boy had grown up under his mother's plain surname, raised on the truth by an old servant who had loved his father, and he had spent his manhood gathering the proof, one document at a time, that he was who he was. The last proof he needed was at Hollinsby. The parish register of Cledon held a page, a christening entry in his grandfather's own hand, that tied the foreign marriage to the English family beyond any lawyer's denial. And the one man who had witnessed the marriage abroad, the old groom Withers, who had served Lord Aldrich and now served out his last years in the Hollinsby stables, half-blind and frightened of the Duchess, could swear to it. Linus had taken the stable post to be near the page and near the witness. He had not counted on a charity girl with steady hands and a habit of seeing what other people decided not to see. By May the spring had turned the fens green, and the Duchess had announced that her son, the young Duke, would not return from his travels for the harvest assembly after all, and that she would host it in his place, and that it would be the finest the county had seen in 20 years. The household doubled its labor. Sophie was sent to and from the stables 4 times a week now, and 4 times a week she found reasons to stay a quarter-hour longer than the errand required. She and Linus spoke of small things at first. The mare, the weather, a book he was reading that she had read too, which surprised them both into a silence that was not uncomfortable. He never touched her. He stood always at a proper distance, his hands occupied with leather or iron, and yet the distance hummed between them like a plucked string, and Sophie went back to the house each time more aware of her own pulse than she had been in years. One evening in early June she came down to the stables in the rain to bring word about the assembly and found the old groom Withers weeping in the straw, and Linus crouched beside him with a hand on the old man's shoulder, speaking low. "She has threatened him," Linus said when he saw Sophie in the doorway, and for once he did not soften it. "The Duchess. She knows he carries something in his memory that she would rather he did not, and she has reminded him this morning that an old blind man with no people can be turned out to the road on a word from her, and that the road in winter is a short road for such a man." He looked at Sophie steadily. "I tell you this because you saw it, and because I have watched you for 3 months, and I do not think you are the kind that carries tales upward for advantage. It was not a compliment dressed as one. It was a plain statement of a thing observed, and it undid Sophie more than any compliment could have. 'I am not,' she said. 'What does he carry?' 'That she fears a truth,' Linus said, 'about whose house this is.' And he would say no more that night, only saw her to the edge of the gravel under his own coat against the rain, walking a careful arm's length away. And when she gave the coat back at the lime walk, his fingers and hers met for 1 second on the wet wool, and neither of them moved, and the rain came down. And the great house watched them both with its 100 dark windows. She did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow room under the eaves, and turned the thing over. Whose house this is? She thought of the Heartwood crest in every chapel window, and the man named Heartwood in the stables, and the brother whose name went unspoken. And she was clever, Sophie, cleverer than anyone at Hollinsby had troubled to notice, and by morning she had assembled most of the shape of it. She did not say what she had guessed. She watched instead the way he had taught her. And what she watched was the Duchess. The Duchess that summer was a woman defending something. It showed in small ways. She had the muniment room, where the old estate papers were kept, locked now where it had never been locked, and the key on her own chatelaine. She had dismissed the curate, a mild young man named Wicket, who kept the Cledden parish register, and replaced him with an older man beholden to her for his living. Twice Sophie carried trays past the library door and heard the Duchess's voice through it, low and hard, speaking to her steward of a page, of Pellington, of a transcript that must not be allowed to come to light. Sophie did not understand all of it. She understood enough to know that the Duchess was not idle in her possession. She was guarding it. In the 3rd week of July, the thing came nearer the surface. There was a dinner, a smaller affair before the assembly, with the neighboring family of Dunscombe and their unmarried son, whom the Duchess had decided would do for Pamela, and with the local magistrate, and with the new curate who owed the Duchess his bread. Sophie was permitted at the foot of the table because a companion made the numbers even. The talk turned as it will at such tables to old scandals. And someone mentioned Lord Aldrich, and the Duchess set down her fork. "My husband's brother," she said, into a hush that fell because everyone present knew the name was forbidden, "was a man who threw away every advantage God gave him to chase a fancy across the continent. There was talk of a marriage. There was talk of a child. There was no marriage, and there was no child. Only a runaway, with no people who put it about that she was a lady. The county did her the courtesy of forgetting her. I would ask that we do the same." She lifted her chin. Her eyes traveled the length of the table and came to rest, for no reason anyone could have named, on Sophie at the foot of it. "Charity," she said, "is a great strain upon the credulous. I have learned to be sparing with it. It was the 2nd time." A public exchange now in front of the magistrate and the Dunscombes and the curate, and the word charity hung in the candlelight, and Sophie felt the whole table turn to look at her. The poor cousin at the foot, the object of the Duchess's sparing charity. And she kept her face still, and her hands quiet in her lap, and understood with sudden cold clarity that the Duchess had just lied about a marriage to a room full of witnesses, and that the lie had teeth. She found Linus the next dawn in the stable-yard, and she did not waste words. She said there was no marriage at her own table. She named your father. She watched his jaw, that jaw like something carved, and saw the muscle in it move. "Linus, I know whose house this is. I have known for a fortnight. I have said nothing, and I will say nothing. Only do not stand there and tell me the grey wants the field. Tell me the truth. or tell me to go, but do not give me the horse again." For a long moment he said nothing. The light came up gold over the stable roof, and a blackbird sang somewhere past the muck heap, and his hands hung at his sides, empty for once, not occupied with leather or iron, and he looked at her as though deciding the largest question of his life. "It is my house," he said at last very quietly, "and my name, and she has spent 4 years and a great deal of money making certain I can never prove it. There is a page in the Cledon Register that would tie my father's marriage to this family past denial, and she has locked the church and bought the curate. There is a man who witnessed the wedding, and she has frightened him near to death. And there is a transcript the bishop made, the only copy she could not reach in the cathedral muniments at Pellington, and I have written for it 3 times, and 3 times the letters have not come back, and I begin to think they never left the county." He drew a breath. "I have 1 life and 1 chance, and no rank to make anyone listen. And if I move too soon, she will have me thrown off the land as a presumptuous servant, and the proof scattered, and I will have failed my father and my mother both. So I muck the stalls, and I read in the tack room, and I wait for a door. That is the truth, Sophie. I should not have let you near enough to learn it." She did not tell him he was wrong to have let her near. She told him about the letters. Because Sophie carried the post, it was one of her small duties, fetching the bag from the receiving office in Cledon and bringing it to the Duchess, who sorted it herself behind a locked door before any of it went out or was given round. Sophie had thought nothing of it. Now she thought of 3 letters written to a cathedral that never came back, and she understood that they had gone no farther than the Duchess's own fire. And her steady purser's daughter mind began very quietly to make a plan. Here is the plain shape of what was coming, told quickly, so that the rest may pass without pausing again. Everything from here was built in the dark, and only shows its shape at the end. Now back to the gravel and the gold light, and the 2 of them standing an arm's length apart, deciding to do a dangerous thing together. They could not send a letter through the Cledon office. They could not break the muniment room without giving the game away. What they could do, Sophie reasoned, was reach Pellington by a hand the Duchess did not control, and the only such hand was a person who came and went from Hollandsby on business of her own, and answered to no chatelaine. That person was the dismissed curate, Mr. Wicket, who had loved his parish and hated to lose it, and who had, before he went, made a fair clerk's copy of certain register pages for his own records, because that was the kind of careful, gentle man he was. He still lived 3 miles off, teaching the village children their letters for pennies. Sophie went to him on her half-day on foot, in the rain, 3 miles of mud lane with the wind off the fens pushing at her borrowed mantle the whole way. She found him in a low cottage with a row of slates propped along the sill and a kettle on a small fire, teaching 2 farm children their letters, and he gave her the 1 chair, and stood himself, and offered her the last of his bread because that was the kind of man he was. She did not waste his hospitality on small talk. She asked him plainly whether his copy of the Cledon Register included a christening entered in the hand of the old Lord Hartwood, near 30 years gone. He went to a deal box under the bed and took out a roll of fair clerk's pages tied with tape, and turned them over by the firelight with careful ink-stained fingers, and stopped at one, and read it twice, and his mild face changed. It did. Mr. Wicket looked from the page to the steady young woman, dripping on his hearth and at the thing she was asking him to risk, a man with no living and no protector against the most powerful hand in the county, and he was quiet a long moment while the kettle ticked. Then he said that he had taken an oath to the truth before he had ever taken one to a duchess, and that a register was not a duchess's property to lock away, but God's own account of who had been born and wed and buried in a parish, and that he would carry a letter himself to Pellington on the carrier's cart, and put the bishop's transcript and his own copy into the same honest hands, if she would write the letter, and Linus would sign it with his father's name. Sophie took his hand at the door and thanked him, and he said, only that he had wanted all these months to be of some use to the truth again, and that she had brought him the chance, It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of ordinary days of reading the Duchess her letters and walking her pug and pouring her chocolate, while 3 miles off a mild curate jolted toward a cathedral on a carrier's cart. 6 weeks in which Sophie learned the exact weight of patience, and in which she and Linus spoke less by design, so that no one should mark how often the charity girl went to the stables. She missed the quarter hours more than she would have thought possible. She had not known until she rationed it how much she had come to need the sight of him among the horses. The plain dark head bent to the work, the gray eyes lifting to find her in the doorway. The harvest assembly fell on the last night of September. The Duchess had spent a fortune on it. The long gallery blazed with 1,000 candles. The violins had come from the county town. The great families came in their carriages up the Lime Drive. And Pamela Cordwell, in cloth money silk, was paraded before the Dunscombe sun like a prize ewe. The Duchess moved among it all in her late husband's diamonds, secure, magnificent, the unquestioned mistress of a house that was not hers, and Sophie moved at the edges of it with trays and errands, the useful charity girl invisible as furniture. Earlier that same day, a man on a tired horse had come up the back lane and put a sealed packet into Linus Hartwood's hands in the tack room. It bore the seal of the cathedral chapter at Pellington. Inside was the bishop's certified transcript of the marriage of Lord Aldrich Hartwood, with the curate's matching copy of the Cledden christening, and a letter from the chapter clerk affirming both as true records under his hand and seal. Linus had read it alone by lamplight, with the smell of horses around him, and then he had sat very still for a long while. And then he had washed, and put on the one good dark coat he owned, and waited for the dark. The dismissive label was spoken its 3rd time that evening, and Sophie heard it as a thing reported, which is the cruelest way to hear a thing. She was carrying a tray past the card-room when 2 of the visiting ladies, not knowing her, spoke of the house and its mistress, and one said she wondered the Duchess kept such a shabby companion about her, and the other said with a little laugh that she had it on good authority. The girl was a charity case, kept on out of duty, and worked like a maid, and that her Grace had said herself the creature ought to be grateful. A purser's brat. Sophie stood with her tray in the dark of the passage, and let it pass through her. The same verdict she had heard at the breakfast table in March, and again at the Duchess's own dinner in July, repeated now behind her back, as settled fact, and she found that it had lost its power to wound. She knew something. The whole bright gallery did not. She set down her tray. She had a part to play, and the hour had come. Linus came up the servants' stair at 10:30, when the assembly was at its full and loud height, and he did not come as a servant. He came in his good dark coat with a packet inside it, and he crossed the polished floor of the long gallery in his stable boots, and the great families parted before him the way water parts before a stone, because there was something in his face and his bearing that did not belong to a man who mucked stalls, and a hush ran ahead of him to where the Duchess stood beneath her late husband's portrait, with a glass of wine in her ringed hand and Pamela at her side. Sophie set down her last tray and came no closer than she needed to, and watched. He stopped before the Duchess. He did not raise his voice. He bent his head, not in deference, but only to bring his mouth near her ear, and he said 6 words, low and level, that no one else in that gallery heard. The glass left her hand. It shattered at her feet in a bright, wet star, and the wine ran dark across the parquet, and the violins faltered and died, one instrument at a time, and the long gallery turned as one body to look at the Duchess of Hollandsby with the color gone out of her face. What Linus had whispered, the thing that broke the glass, was the only sentence in the world. She had spent 4 years, and a fortune to keep from ever being said. He had told her that the transcript was at Hollandsby tonight, certified and sealed, and that the bishop's chapter held the proof of it, and he had named himself. Then he straightened, and he turned so that the whole gallery could hear what came next, and into the held silence with 200 of the county's first families watching. He spoke the line he had carried his whole life toward, the costly public claim, 12 words, no more, in the very room where his family had decided he did not exist. "I am Lord Hartwood's son. This is my house," she knew. He never had cause to say them again, and that once was enough. The Duchess did not collapse all at once. She was made of harder stuff than that, and she mounted, even then, the defense she had spent years preparing. "This man," she said, and her voice climbed, "is a stablehand, a presumptuous servant. There is no marriage. There was never any marriage. He has no people and no proof and no name, but the one he stole from his betters." She looked round the gallery for the agreement that had always come when she lifted her chin, and she found the magistrate looking at her gravely instead, because the magistrate had heard her own mouth deny a marriage at her own table in July, and was a man who remembered things. "There is proof, Your Grace," Sophie said. She had not meant to be the one to say it. She had meant to keep to the edges. The words came out of her clear and even across the whole length of that gallery, and every head turned to the charity girl who had set down her trays, and the Duchess's eyes found her with a hatred that had no surprise left in it, only recognition. Sophie did not look away. "The marriage of Lord Aldrich was witnessed and recorded," she said. "The Bishop of Pellington holds the transcript and has sent it certified under the chapter seal. The christening that ties it to this family is entered in the old lord's own hand, and a fair copy exists outside this house, where Your Grace could not reach it. 3 letters asking for that transcript were written to Pellington from Hollinsby this summer. None of them ever arrived. I carried the post, Your Grace. I know where they went." A sound went through the gallery like wind through wheat. The Duchess's defense did not fail for want of trying. She turned upon Sophie with the full weight of her rank, and named her a liar and an ingrate, a charity case repaying shelter with slander, and for one moment the old machinery worked and a few faces wavered, because she was a duchess and Sophie was a purser's brat, and that had always been enough. Into that moment the old groom Withers was brought forward. He had been waiting in the cold by the servants' door, and Linus had sent for him, and now the half-blind old man shuffled into the candlelight and stood trembling before the mistress who had threatened him with the winter road. And the magistrate asked him gently whether he had witnessed a marriage abroad some 30 years gone, and the old man, who had been frightened his whole long life, looked at Sophie Carstone standing straight and unafraid at the edge of the floor, and found in the sight of her a courage he had thought was spent. "I held the bridegroom's horse outside the chapel door," Withers said, in a cracked voice that carried in the silence. "I saw my lord wed. I saw the priest sign the book. I have carried it 40 years, and her grace has bid me carry it to my grave, and I am too old now to be frightened into hell for her. The boy is true. He is Lord Aldreth's son. I'd swear it on the cross." He had given the one thing the Duchess could not buy back. He had not been lured or tricked into it. He had been moved to it by the plain, steady worth of a girl who had treated an old blind servant as a man worth saving, and that is a thing no fortune can guard against because it is built in the place fortune cannot reach. The Duchess looked from the old groom to the sealed packet the magistrate now held in his hand, and from the packet to the grave faces of the family she had ruled, and last of all to the man in the plain dark coat who had her late husband's portrait at his back and her late husband's blood in his face. And in that instant she understood the one thing she had never had to learn before, that her certainty had carried her safely everywhere in the world, except here. Her mouth opened. No polished hierarchy protective sentence came out of it. She fragmented. "I only," she said. "It was my son's. It was. I only kept what was." And the diamonds at her throat, her late husband's diamonds, suddenly looked like what they were, which was borrowed. She was not destroyed. Hiya! The county did not need her destroyed, only corrected. The magistrate took the packet and the old groom's word and the curate's coming testimony, and the law in England is slow, but it is not blind. And within the season the title and the estate of Hollinsby were confirmed where they had always belonged. The Duchess was not turned out to the winter road. she had threatened an old man with. She was given the dower house at the edge of the park, which was more than she had given anyone, and she lived there quietly, and some who had watched her rule for 30 years said it was a gentler end than she had earned, and some who were kinder said that correction was its own justice, and let her keep what dignity the dower house allowed. Pamela Cordwell married the Dunscombe son before the year was out and left the county, having decided, in the way of people who have backed the losing side, that she had never much cared for Hollinsby anyway. Sophie did not see the slow turning of the law. She saw the morning after the assembly, which came up clear and cold with the first true frost of autumn silvering the lime walk, and she went down to the stables out of habit, before she remembered that the man she would find there was no longer a stablehand. He was there all the same. He had not slept either. He stood in the stable-yard in his shirt-sleeves, with the grey mare's head against his shoulder, and the breath of the horses smoked in the cold. And when he saw Sophie at the edge of the gravel, he came to her, and for the first time in 7 months, he did not stop at an arm's length. "They will make me a duke by the spring," he said, "if the law runs as the magistrate believes it will. There will be a great deal that is strange, and a great deal I do not want. A house I have only ever entered by the back stairs. Servants who watched me muck their master's stalls." He looked at her, and the smoke-colored eyes were not guarded now. They were open all the way down. "I find I do not greatly fear any of it, except one thing. I fear doing it without the only person in that house who ever saw me before there was anything to see." Sophie's mouth said that he would have advisers and stewards and the whole county to guide him. Her hand of its own accord had come to rest against his chest over the place where the packet had ridden the night before, and her hand did not say anything about advisers at all. "Sophie," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name, and he said it the way a man says the one word he has been saving. "I have spent my life proving who I am to people who did not deserve to be convinced. I will not spend another hour proving anything to you. I know exactly who you are. You are the woman who carried the post and counted the letters and went 3 miles in the rain to ask a frightened man to be brave. Marry me. Not because I am to be a duke. I would ask you the same standing in this yard with nothing but the horses, which is, after all, how you came to want me." She did not answer in words at first. She had spent 7 months keeping her face still and her hands quiet. The charity girl who knew her place, and now in the cold, bright morning, she let her face be exactly what it felt, which was undone with joy, and she put her other hand up to his jaw. That jaw she had thought was carved out of something that could not bend, and found it warm under her fingers and trembling slightly, and she understood that he had been as frightened as she. "Yes," she said, "standing in this yard with the horses. Yes." He kissed her. Then, soft and full of every promise, with the grey mare watching in the frost on the limes and the great cold house behind them that would soon be theirs and would never again be cold in the way it had been. He had waited 7 months for that one kiss, and it was enough. They were married at Cledon in the new year, in the small church whose register had nearly cost them everything with Mr. Gore. Wicket restored to his parish and reading the service in his mild, careful voice, and old Withers in the front pew in a new coat, weeping the way the old weep with no shame in it. The Bishop of Pellington came himself, which a bishop does not do for a stablehand, and does do for a duke, and stood as witness to the marriage of the man whose father's marriage he had certified, and remarked to the magistrate afterward that it was a tidy thing to see a record set right within one's own lifetime. That is nearly the whole of it. There is one image left, kept back until now. If Sophie's journey moved you, stay through this last picture before you go, and carry it with you, because it is the truest thing in the story. In the spring, when the law had run its course and the dower house was quiet and the great house was theirs, Sophie went one evening into the long gallery where the glass had broken. The parquet had long since been cleaned and waxed, and you could not have found the place if you had not known it. She knew it. She stood on the spot where a wineglass had shattered in the most powerful hand in the county, and looked up at the portrait of the old Duke, and beside it now a new portrait lately hung, of a dark-haired man in a navy coat with smoke-colored eyes, painted not as a duke but as he had asked to be painted, with one hand resting on the neck of a gray mare. Linus came and found her there, as he always found her, and stood at her shoulder, and they did not say anything for a while. Then she took from the pocket of her gown a small worn thing she had carried since March, the clergyman's letter of introduction that had brought a charity girl to Hollinsby in a borrowed mantle, soft now, with handling, and she did not put it into any record, or any drawer. She folded it once more along its old creases and held it in her closed hand, and they turned together and walked the length of the gallery toward the warm rooms beyond, where the fires were lit and somebody had left a piano open mid-phrase, and behind them the candles guttered low over the place no one else would ever know to look for. And the house that had held its breath for 30 years let it go,